everyone. Welcome or welcome back to another episode of The Crossroads. Long time no see or hear from me, not from you, of course. Well, thank you all for joining me again back on the program. And I have to say, I've missed you, but not really, because I have been up to my gills in final semester work. It is no game. It's not a game. And I thought, because I was doing really well, I was like, you know what? I can do this. I can just ride this octopus channeling that I'm doing right now. I can handle. No, that's not true. So I've had to make some cuts. And unfortunately, the place where I trimmed was recording regularly. And I apologize. The last time you all saw me was looking, at least a little bit disheveled, talking about e-waste. And I said something about it then, and I'm just reiterating it, that school has really taken a toll. So I've had to rearrange some things, and unfortunately that had to come at the cost of coming on here and talking about the environment with everybody. But nevertheless, I am persevering. I recorded this episode with Desmond, Monsieur Price from the Independent Thought podcast. And even though we are talking about, in general, the Electoral College, we do mention the first presidential debate because it was so horrifying. It does merit some discussion, right? And we've since had the second one, and obviously the VP debate. And in general, and I think I've talked about this before, I think, at this point, I keep hearing that there are folks who don't know who they're voting for. And I don't envy you. But I also kind of am looking at you funny. Like when in Revenge of the Body Snatchers, like when they know that you're not one of them, it's like that a little bit. Sorry, it's also spooky season. So I've been watching old school horror movies. I watched the original Halloween, the original The Hills Have Eyes, and I'm actually gonna, if I feel like it or I have time, I'm actually going to try to read an essay about The Hills Have Eyes and their link to the family structure. I'm sure it's going to be interesting. I'm sure it's going to give me something that my spirit needs. But happy Halloween to everyone that celebrates. I know that I do. I love Halloween. It's one of my favorite holidays. Anyway, I'm going to now turn it over so that you guys can be mesmerized by Desmond's wit and pithiness. And I'm there too. That's not fair. Desmond and I have really great conversations, so I'm sure this is just a continuation of that. So enjoy. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Crossroads. I'm your host, Christina Greer, and this is the show for and about environmental justice and those who fight the fight with skin as melanated as the days are long. Knowledge is power, and we are breaking down stereotypes one episode at a time. Hello. Welcome back or welcome to The Crossroads. I am Rashida, and today I'm joined by oil tycoon and podcaster Desmond Price.
Thank you for having me on your podcast today.
You are welcome. Thank you for taking the time away from your horseback riding lessons to come and be a guest on this show and talk about voting. But before we get there,
yes,
we're going to give some flowers. And this is the segment in the show where we give flowers to someone in our life, someone in the movement that has inspired us, that we want to honor. And I will let you go first.
Oh, right on the spot. Okay, so I was watching an episode of The Breakfast Club I think it was like a week or so ago. And the guest in question was Chris Rock. And he was talking about his recent dealings with therapy. I guess he's recently gone into therapy to talk about some of issues that he's having in his life. And I thought that that was a really powerful thing to kind of like talk about on a platform as big as the Breakfast Club. I feel as though mental health is a huge stigma in our society and our culture. And it's always really important to me when I see somebody as prominent as that, just put himself out there and kind of like normalize this conversation a little bit more. I feel like we as a society really need to stop this unnecessary stigma that we have towards mental health. And I really personally advocate that more people get involved with it, see a therapist, talk about their issues. So giving my flowers today to Chris Rock for doing a little bit to push that conversation in the right direction.
That's really awesome. Yeah, I definitely second that. That's a very brave thing to do, to open up and talk about, your issues in such a public manner. And for me, I'm giving flowers to Breonna Taylor, for obvious reasons that we all are aware of. I know I didn't comment um, about that in the last episode. I really just wanted to focus on getting it out, but it was very much so on my mind, even though if I'm not talking about it publicly. So I'm going to give some flowers to her today. So, friend, we're talking about the Electoral College.
Yes.
What it is for folks that may not know, and also some of the talk of alternatives to it. And for background for the listeners, I was actually a guest on Desmond's podcast, the Independent Thought podcast, where we were actually talking about voter suppression and why people don't vote or don't feel motivated to vote. So there is going to be some overlap here, which is the intent. And we're just going to also probably do what he and I do, which is to delve into random tangents. So come with us. But to really get the conversation started, let's hit up the Electoral College and what it is. So for folks that don't know, the Electoral College is comprised of electors by state that ultimately are the folks that decide who the president and the vice president are. Now, you may be aware of the fact that in your state, you have a certain number of electoral votes that all go towards the magic number of 270, which is the majority needed to be declared the winner. But there is also the popular vote. And for some of my older millennials, some of the OG millennials, as I like to refer to us, you all remember the very, very contentious election in the year 2000, in which homeboy, who was it?
Al Gore.
Thank you very much. Come on, Desmond.
And George W. Bush.
Come on. That's right. And Al Gore won the popular vote, but George Bush ultimately became president. And we all remember the pregnant Chad debacle. And from that election onward, there's been growing interest in doing away with the Electoral College. And there is something called the National Popular Vote that has started to gain some traction. At least 10 states have already signed on to be a part of it, which would basically just allow states to give their electoral votes to the national, selected person as opposed to who wins the state. And that would change some things. So, Desmond, I want to know from your perspective, first of all, what are your thoughts about the Electoral College? Do you think it's something that we should keep? Do you think we should get rid of it? What do you think?
I have a lot of different thoughts on the Electoral College. First of all, I wanted to just, briefly thank you again for having me on the podcast. But the Electoral College is something that I don't know that it really makes the most sense in the world. But at the same time, I don't know that any of the alternatives that are being presented really fix the problem at hand, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
I've spent quite a few days here going over the Electoral College and the challenges that are being presented with it. I mean, especially the one thing that people like to point out is the differentiation between a state like Wyoming and a state like California,
right,
where Wyoming having 3 electoral votes and California having 55, it sounds like a huge difference. But when you compare why Wyoming has 3 to why California has 55, you find out that Wyoming, each person who is a citizen of that state, their vote actually has 3 times the weight
Mm-hmm.
as a person does in California. And that's the basis for the argument, is that the Electoral College is disproportionately making people in more rural states have more power than people in urban states.
Right.
And obviously on paper, that is an issue, right? There's no way to kind of like deny that that is a problem. However, the question then becomes, well, how do you fix it, right? And so most people go to the popular vote. Um, I personally think that while in theory it makes sense that the popular vote would be a better proposition, when if you apply how it would be implemented, it actually might make the problem worse, as
Hmm.
far as I'm concerned. And that depends on your viewpoint. Uh, if you were to change it to the popular vote, you would then create a system where most politicians would only campaign in maybe like 5 or 6 places in
Right.
the entire country. So you'd have people campaigning in California, in Texas, Florida, New York, Illinois, Pennsylvania, New Jersey. Like that would be the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
So the rest of the country would feel completely isolated from the political process. And so in theory, you'll have the one person, one vote model, but at the same time, the original intention for it, which I know is, we're going to get into that a little bit here in a second about why the original intentions weren't as great as they make it sound, but the original intention, what they claimed, was that the rural parts of America would have a say in the political process. And while they may not have, had that be their real reasoning for why they claimed that should be the case, it's in my personal belief that that is something that we should try to do in some way, shape, or form. So to answer your question briefly, do I think that the Electoral College should remain intact the way it is? No, but I think we need to be careful about how we would upend it, because I don't know that the popular vote really fixes the problem that we have at hand.
I have to agree. I don't really think that the national popular vote is quite what we're looking for or what we're after. But I can't really fully agree that, I think the Electoral College does need to be done away with. I mean, part of what you were alluding to is the part of the Electoral College in which the inaction of it also included the 3/5 compromise, in which
Yes.
Black folks were 3/5 of peoples.
Yes.
So we can just all see how grossly that's grossly terrible that is. But you know, I also am interested to know about some of your thoughts on other methods of voting. Like, for example, you and I were talking about perhaps voting by district.
Right. So there are 2 different alternatives out there right now about like how you could change the electoral college. Well, there's several, but there's 2 I'm going to focus on really quickly here. One of the ones that you just referenced was the idea, instead of right now, what we have in place, for those who may not be completely aware, is what we call like a winner take all system in each state. So if you win the state of Virginia by 1 vote, you get all 13 of the electoral votes from the state of Virginia. But in the congressional district model, what you would have is that you would actually go into Virginia, and instead of having the winner take all approach, you would have each person who was competing in that state, whether it was 2 people traditionally or extra, in some years we have another person running, whoever would win each individual district of Virginia's 11 districts, they would take 1 vote from each district that they ran. Now, the other model that I have looked into is just instead of doing it that way, is to just proportionally break up the electoral votes. So if you won 60% of Virginia's votes, you would get 60% of 13 votes, and then the other person would get 40% of 13 votes, which personally I believe would be the better way to go about this, because if you go by the congressional district route, then you still contend with the fact that there's so many gerrymandered districts
Right.
in the country that you're still playing basically to the Republicans' hands. I don't really want to make this partisan, but at the moment, they're the ones who gerrymandered most of the map. So it would still disproportionately affect them. In fact, looking at that model, I saw some research that was done along this. It actually would skew the results toward the Republicans even more than the Electoral College currently does.
Mm-hmm.
So the proportionality fact, I think, would be a better solution because it doesn't go by districts. It just goes by overall vote total, but proportioning it out that way. And the reason why I think that that's better is because it gives candidates the incentive to campaign everywhere versus right now they basically just campaign in 15 states and they call it a day.
Right.
So the Republican voter in California currently has no real reason to vote. The Democratic voter in Texas, I mean, they claim they have a reason to vote, but that state's still going red. I'm sorry, everyone.
Yeah.
Um,
In case you
I mean,
thought.
I'll get into that a little bit more a little bit later, but you know, with this model that I'm proposing, I feel as though that would incentivize the Democrats to go to Texas, it would incentivize the Republicans to go to California. It would just give more people a reason to vote and energize more people to get involved in the political process, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on that?
I definitely think that it is an interesting proposition, and I definitely think we would have to clean up with gerrymandering first. And yes, while Republicans definitely love to do that, Democrats do it too. So, keeping it, bipartisan or keeping it partisan. But yeah, I definitely think that, we should consider alternate models of voting. Particularly, I was doing some research on ranked choice voting. And like Maine actually has already implemented this year at the state level. And a couple of other states in particular, Massachusetts and Alaska, are going to offer that as an option to establish that at the state level in this coming election. So, and what does that mean? I mean, that means that Maine voters are going to be using ranked choice voting to vote for the president for the first time in this election. And maybe
Yeah.
that gives you some fear, but I wouldn't worry about it. We have bigger things to worry about this election, which we will definitely be getting into. But I I like this concept. I'm
You're torn.
Yeah.
It's okay to be torn. It's a really complicated issue. I mean, to be fair, the way that our politics is currently set up makes no sense to basically everyone else in the world, or
No, it
even
doesn't.
or even to us. And so we're taking a broken system and trying to tweak it. And no matter how you slice it, it's still a pretty broken system.
Right. And just like you and I were talking about on your show, when it comes to state voter laws and how
Yes.
completely different they are, depending on which state you're in, how you have some states, as we were talking about, folks that have previously been incarcerated. In some states, you completely lose your rights. Some states, you only lose it while you're incarcerated. And then when you come out, you get them reinstated. I mean, it varies.
Yes.
And these are all things that, as we discussed, discourage people from voting, but also, it continues and maintains the status quo. I mean, another aspect of this of the Electoral College is also the census, and there's a lot of I would say odd sense, like people feel uncomfortable completing the census. I know it was a pretty sizable issue this time around, specifically because of some of the things that Trump wanted to include on it, which would have definitely targeted Latinx folks. But the census also helps to adjust the number of electoral votes by state, depending on how folks are moving. And then I think about that in terms of the reason that folks are leaving or going to a city, like we're seeing right now in the midst of coronavirus, where folks are actually starting to leave the city and for
Yes.
more rural areas. And to do that, I mean, ultimately there could be some changes from, obviously maybe not this census, but the next one. So saying all that to say, like you said, I'm torn. I don't really know what the best path forward is. I mean, based upon what we've talked about, voting by district or, the rank choice, like where should we go? What's the best solution?
You know, it's one of those things where I feel as though, more options need to be presented to the public itself, because you know, the overall trust that the people have in the government is waning. I've even seen polls coming out recently that overall trust in the media and the government, overall are at like all-time lows. And I feel as though not addressing this in some way, shape, or form is not going to help people trust in the process, the political process anymore. So just presenting some new alternatives would really go a long way. But just to focus on ranked choice voting here for a second, to kind of like give a little bit of explanation to it. Ranked choice voting is not so much how votes are allocated by the state, but more or less how you vote for the politician. So it would be how you choose the individual politician, not how the votes would be allocated on a state level, if that makes sense. But I don't really know what the best point forward is. The question I want to pose to you is, do you think that every state should have the exact same system, or do you think different states should have different systems for how they allocate votes? Because right now we have states like Maine and Nebraska
Right.
who allocate their votes by individual districts. As you can see, Maine actually gives 2 votes to whoever wins the whole state, and then they have 1 vote each for their 2 different congressional districts. And then Nebraska has just 1 district where they allocate a vote to, and then the rest of the state is just one whole block. Do you think that each state should have their own kind of rules like that, or do you think we should all be playing by the same rules?
I think that by not re-signing the Voting Rights Act, that it allowed this mass disenfranchisement of of Black folks in particular, but people of color. I just think that this idea of states being allowed to make decisions that are so nuanced and important at a national level, I just don't think that should be left up to the states to decide. It does not work. It's not working for education. It's not working. It's
Yeah.
not working. And I don't understand why we are still subscribing to this aspect of government either. I just think that I know that obviously businesses don't necessarily want to have more government intervention, but to me, it's even at its basis and what we've seen historically, we can tell that there's not enough government intervention, and that oftentimes they let things go on for entirely too long before they even act. So I 100% think that there needs to be just uniform national voting laws, period. But it needs to be more of, I would say, just much more of a consensus basis. We have to get out of this idea of one state mattering more than the other, or the North versus the South. Like that stuff it is still playing a very significant part in socially in our elections, and it's clear that it's not helping anybody. So it definitely needs to come to an end, to answer your question in the most long-winded, ranty way possible.
Hey, that's what a podcast is for. I mean, let's be fair. Let me ask you just like a devil's advocate type question really quick.
Oh boy, okay.
What is rhetorical question first, like what is the purpose of, this discussion in and of itself? I mean, the reason why people bring up changing to the popular vote is because people who won the popular vote did not win the presidency.
Okay.
Correct?
Yeah.
And so this basically, like comes from a place of, I lost the election and I shouldn't have. So that's the reason why these conversations come up, because the popular vote wasn't an issue in 2009.
Mm.
And it wasn't an issue in 1997. It wasn't an issue in 2005. I mean, it's only been an issue in basically 2001 and then 2017. And that's when the issue really became a big deal. So the point I'm trying to make here is that, I feel as though certain people who, like advocate for this, they only advocate it when it's like disaffecting them. But currently, Democrats have been able to win just as often as Republicans had in the past like 25 years. It's been a pretty back and forth swing.
Hmm.
So I don't know that you can claim that the system is unwinnable, even though it isn't fair, if that makes sense. So while the system is not fair to everyone individually, there has been pretty consistent balance and representation as far as Democratic and Republican presidents in Washington, D.C.
Okay, so I think we have come to the crossroads. And I say that because this is a not just a good segue into the talking about the election, but really to bring in some of the other conversations that I've had about reimagining what we do. I've talked about it more so from the idea of certain folks that I think should be involved politically. Like, for instance, I really think that Marianne, well, I think it's Williamson.
Yes.
I really think she should be the Secretary of Peace. And I think that should be a department. I love her. So that's okay. That's my hippie brain. But, I think I kind of want to retract what I said about this, about states' rights being federal, only because I think we have to do something even bigger than just that. I think there are so many inequities that just having the same voter laws would be a start, but is certainly not enough. And again, bringing in our conversation that we had, we were talking about voter suppression. And even though Texas,
Yes.
yes, they do have a lot of electoral votes, and obviously it's a big state and it's constantly red despite the best efforts of Austin to change it. It's red, but they also have very strict voting laws. And we talked about the Black woman who thought she was completely off of the watch of the state, as being previously incarcerated, to cast her ballot, and was put in jail. So we know that there are inequities at the state level, but these things are fundamental, and we have to
Yes.
actually dig a little deeper than just what we're talking about. Even this speculation of the national popular vote or ranked choice voting, none of it really matters unless it's actually going to address the fact that we still adhere to a two-party system,
Yes.
that we don't really have. I don't know about you. I don't know about you, but I know that Joe Biden's old ass was not my first choice. I know that.
No, he was not my first choice.
So watching him with his sleepy time eyes, like he had just had a cup of the finest chamomile tea against drunk uncle number 7. I mean, what was I watching with that poor man, the battered wife, just trying to give the big piece of chicken? Like, what are we watching? It was a
Um,
mess.
yes, it was. In other podcasts that I've been on, I refer to our current system as corpse number 1 versus corpse number 2. And just to briefly go back to Texas really quick, I don't want to let them off the hook just yet.
Okay.
Just for those out there who don't know me, not completely familiar with me, I run a political podcast, and so I'm constantly keeping my head in the sand for the rest of you who don't want to. I'm trying to do the work over here to keep
Okay.
everyone engaged with all the craziness going on. And so I like to tell you that Governor Abbott of Texas just recently decided to do his most notable form of voter suppression yet, as far as I'm concerned, which is during this pandemic, where they're already making it incredibly difficult to vote by mail because of coronavirus, where
Uh-huh.
they're not even really letting people cite coronavirus as a reason to request a mail-in ballot. But on top of that, as crazy as you think that might sound, now they are, what they originally had in place was there were certain locations where you could drop off your absentee ballot. If you didn't want to put it in the mail, they had what these called like these drop-off boxes where you can go put your ballot out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Great thing to do during a time of social distancing, the pandemic. Obviously, Texas has been a hard hit state by the coronavirus. Well, Governor Abbott just a couple days ago decided that he was going to reduce the number of absentee ballot drop-off locations to one per county. One per county. Now, that might not mean anything in North Texas, where there may only be a couple hundred people in your county, but in a place like Houston, that's kind of a big deal. And
Yeah.
I think that's the point, because they are seeing that that state is trending blue, and the Republicans in power in that state are doing everything they can to keep voting as minimal as they can in areas where they feel like more Democratic voters might live, i.e., Black voters. So to the people out in Dallas and San Antonio, Houston, Austin, this is more evidence about why you need to vote, because people like this should not be able to be in power making decisions like that. It's a damn shame.
I would also like to give the state of Texas the blues. I mean, before I do that, shout out to my listeners in Texas. But for the rest of you, no. Texas also is a state that has a couple of noted incidences of environmental injustice. If you folks, for your reference, I would definitely recommend reading the book Dumping in Dixie by Dr. Robert Bullard, who answered my email. Um, in which he talks about his experience meeting the residents of a specific community in West Dallas, Texas, that live next to a lead smelter. So please understand that this is, we're encouraging folks to vote. And I think that voting is important. I know it's hard times. Quite frankly, I managed to get through the first 15 minutes of the debate. I gulped an entire glass of wine, cackled, and then turned the TV off. I couldn't do it. That's the best that I could do. I just, between him telling him to shut up, it was a mess. I need some confirmation. Did you also watch the mess?
Yes, I watched it in its entirety, not by
You
choice.
did?
Not by choice. So I watched little clips of it and decided, yep, I'm good. And then my girlfriend got home and she was like, I want to watch the whole thing. And I was like,
She
I
does like
guess.
horror movies.
And
Yeah.
I was like, I guess we're watching the whole thing. So
Oh my God.
that's how that night went. So yes, I watched the entire thing. And you know what? It went exactly the way I thought it would go. And, you know, I actually did an episode about that on my podcast. I did 3 different episodes in regards to how I thought the debates would go. This was back in May and March, and it went exactly the way I knew it was going to go. And you know what? I'm just going to keep it pretty brief on this one. We all deserve better than that.
We deserve a lot better than what we have. And that's what I'm talking about when I'm saying that, we have to do away with the system entirely. It wasn't, we can talk about the Electoral College being a remnant of slavery, but the reality is that there is no federal building that didn't have slave hands building it. And you can't just stop at having national or federal mandated voting laws. You can't just stop at, getting rid of a 2-party system. It's got to be a little bit deeper than that. So I, I don't want to talk about the presidential debate all that much because it was terrible, and that's all I can say about it. I mean, I like some of the memes. That's all I can do.
I will give a quick moment to it, just a very quick one.
Okay.
I know that a lot of time has been focused this week on President Trump's kind of like his stand by and stand back kind of thing that he said about the
The
Proud
Proud
Boys.
Boys. Mm-hmm.
And to be honest with you, I'm a little disappointed that particularly was where the media wanted to focus all of its attention on. Because I felt like while that was an egregious thing to say, I felt like the more egregious thing that was said I believe it was like shortly before that, when the moderator, Chris Wallace, asked President Trump about why he got rid of racial sensitivity training across America.
I miss that.
And he had mentioned that the racial sensitivity training was promoting anti-American ideas. And I literally like dropped what I was doing when I heard him say that and was completely like thrown off.
Wow.
And it blew me away that Joe Biden didn't react to that, that that Chris Wallace didn't react to that, that I've been watching show after show on CNN and The Daily Show and multiple media outlets. They're correctly going after him for not denouncing white supremacy, but no one has even managed to remark on the fact that he's tried to associate racial sensitivity training with anti-American ideas. And I think that's a failure on everyone's part to not call him out on that, because that is, I'm not going to curse on your show, but that is effed up. I'm just saying.
So I have a lot of thoughts about that. And I will try not to swear on my own show. It's interesting because it's something that I've said before on the show. And I'll just keep saying, it's because people want to fight Goliath. Everybody wants to slay Goliath. Everybody wants to be, who considers himself to be of liberal mind, which is such a free-flowing, open-ended term, what that exactly means. But really what it means is that whatever is happening is not an upset to my privilege. See, everything's fine and dandy when we're looking at and expecting the president to denounce a hate group like the Proud Boys. He didn't do that when Charlottesville happened. So I'm confused as to why anyone would expect anything else. But you can overlook the fact that he's called racial bias or racial equity training introducing un-American ideas. You know why? Because folks don't want to have to do the equity work or the actual work period to really make equity real in the workplace. There was a Bloomberg study not too long ago that showed an overwhelming majority of CEOs are white. Like it was like 80%. Like, I mean, do you honestly think like a person like him would be interested in actually, promoting ideals that would radically change work and office dynamics? I mean, never mind, because I'll start spilling my own tea. But basically,
No, it's all right. It's all right. Let me spew off that for a little bit here. For those of you who may still have bank accounts with Wells Fargo, their CEO just recently came out and said that, one of the reasons why they don't have more black people on their board is because there's not a whole lot of black talent out there.
I don't have Wells Fargo,
So for those of you who may have a bank account there, I just wanted to give you a little bit of heads up about, where you're doing business at.
And you should find a black bank like the Industrial Bank, which has branches in DC, and they are also online.
So there you go. But yeah, so I encourage everybody, don't take my word for it. That's one of the things I'm always trying to promote, do your own research. Go find the clip on YouTube about where Chris Wallace asked him about racial sensitivity training. Don't take my word for it. Go listen to his reaction in its entirety so you can understand my frustration, and maybe you can be speaking about it for yourself with authority versus how you heard me say it. So
you did a good job.
That is something that I felt like needed to get more coverage, is not getting enough coverage. So I had to take a quick second there to speak on that.
I know. I think that was good because I didn't hear it, and I wouldn't have, because all I'm seeing is, he doesn't denounce the Proud Boys and he's got coronavirus. And I'm like, no, he doesn't. But okay.
Well, I mean, they said he did.
They did. They say a lot of things. I just, I think years of watching Scandal and the good sense God gave me tells me he doesn't have the coronavirus.
Oh, going on to the conspiracy theorist route here.
Don't do that.
We are once again at the crossroads.
Don't do that. I actually had a conspiracy corner for like one episode. And I told people, I was like, look, I got one time to do this because I get too freaked out about conspiracy theories and I'll be up all night. So I did it once and I never did it again. And see, if I'm going down that road, I'm going to stop myself because I need to get to sleep. I cannot be up researching. Nope.
I want the rest of you to know that once this episode ends, Rashida and I'm sure will talk for a couple minutes afterwards. I'm
We
going to
will.
give her a bunch of conspiracies to keep her up at all night.
No. Why would you do that? Is this payback because I told you about the Shutter channel? Is that what this is about?
I plead the fifth.
That you sneaky salmon. See, it's my favorite time of year.
Hey, October is a great time of the year, and also I have to say, kind of like on the voting front, let me
Yeah,
bring us back to the Electoral College here
please
for a
do.
quick second. You know, we have had a difference in opinion in this episode. I think it's important to, when you're having conversations like this, to kind of bring multiple positions to the table so that
Mhm.
people can have like a diversity of understanding about the issue at large. The reason why I don't really want to focus on going to the popular vote is
Mm.
because I don't think it's ever going to happen. And the reason why I feel that way is because the way that it's constructed in the Constitution. There's been over 700 challenges to the Electoral College in American history. 700. And none of them, I mean zero, have
Yeah.
worked. So when you're 0 for 700,
Title of the episode.
I'm not trying to be mean about it. I'm just saying that like there might have to be another way about making our democracy more representative, because that might be a dead end. And the reason why is because it's enshrined in the Constitution. And so it would take, on top of the fact that you would need 75% of Congress to agree on it, which they do occasionally when it comes to, giving the military more money. But when it comes to getting Congress to agree on something 75%, that's only the first hurdle. After that, you would have to have 38 states ratify it. And that would include the over 30 Republican states. And you're asking them to give up the thing that gives them the most power. That's just never going to happen. I mean, not in my opinion. I don't know how you're going to get Louisiana, Mississippi, and Idaho, and North Dakota, and Nebraska. You know what I'm trying to say? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know how you're going to ever get them to sign off on something that's going to take away their power. And so I just don't know how realistic it is. But with that being said, I think the better alternative is just to get more people motivated in the political process, because if we can't change the government how it's currently constructed, we should get better people in there who can get the system changed into a better way. And that starts with voting.
I agree. I definitely, so I'm and this is kind of where we differ a little bit. But
Yes.
I'm of two minds about this. There's one side of me that keeps it in line with what I grew up knowing, which was the importance and the power of voting. How we were, as Black folks, were completely disenfranchised from it and had to, and are continuing to still have issues with it, with being able to fully participate, either because of incarceration or, whatever it is, just losing the right to vote or not having enough polling places or just feeling like your vote does not count. And so, yes, on one side, I feel like that's something worth fighting for. But on the other side, I'm more leaning towards just the complete overhaul of the system. And
Yes.
I can't. So the national popular vote it's cute, it's gaining some traction. We mentioned that there are 10 states so far that have, including DC, that have, signed off to do it. But
Yes.
I'm not fully convinced that it's like you said, I'm not really certain it's going to go over. And I don't really think we have that kind of time. I think that's something about like this pandemic has really got me on this concept of compressed time. But
Yes.
I also want to talk about the fact that, what was this? There was a study that said that we've got about 5 years. Like there's a countdown now that originally what a lot of environmentalists were concerned about was the changing of 2 degrees. And if the global temperature goes up by 2 degrees, then it's going to be like party over, go home. And now and that's still a very much so still an issue. It is something that we look at and investigate. But now we have this data to show that, or potentially to show that, that the planet could be over within 5 years. We could be over and done within 5 years if we don't radically correct our behavior. So to me, the same thing I said about Kamala Harris's environmental justice plan is the same thing I'm saying about any kind of interest in changing the national popular vote. It's not fast enough. Like,
Right.
we are really going to have to start thinking very radically about what we're doing. Do I think we have to participate in this particular trash election? Absolutely. But I'm also very torn and just disconcerted because, again, I watched two old dudes duke it out on national television, on Beyonce's internet. And I am troubled. Okay.
Yes. It's an interesting, thing to bring up, the environmental piece. There's two different perspectives that I have with it. On one hand, I'm glad that at least one party is focusing on it, because for the longest time, neither party really cared. They were both so,
Oh, yeah.
there's both so much in the pockets of the oil and gas industry that there was no real progress being made by anyone in this country. So the fact that at least one party is now on board is I guess some progress. However, the real issue that I feel like doesn't get talked about enough, which some people did bring up in the primaries, is that even if America went 100% to renewable energy and cut out all greenhouse gas, emissions and so on and so forth, and we got rid of fossil fuels, the 15% of the total carbon footprint is what America actually is.
Yeah.
And so even if America goes completely to zero carbon emissions, we are still only 15% of the problem.
Yeah.
So the question really becomes, if this is a global issue that we're trying to address, how do you get nations like China and India to get on board when they are, not to point fingers, but I'm pointing fingers, they are they're the bulk of the problem.
They are. And I talked about this on a previous episode, in which I explained that when countries were signing on to at least try to manage their emissions and reduce them,
right?
China,
Paris Climate Agreement.
Right. Thank you, Blinken. That China didn't sign on because at the time they were considered to be a third world country. And look at them now.
I don't know how they get away with that stuff.
I don't know either. Oh, yeah. Like there are so many dams in China, and just like their control of the water flow is it's uncanny. And yes, they're a major contributor in themselves, in and of themselves, to climate change. And I think that, yes, while it's good that at least the Democrats are thinking about it, I feel like it's still a part of, contributing to the system at large, if that makes sense. Like it's still giving corporations an opportunity to adjust, which is really just for them to adjust their profit margins, not so much for them to start to do the right thing. It's just for them to figure out how to cut corners another kind of way. I mean,
right.
That's, and that's like what we're doing. And I think, I feel bad because I kind of had some hope about like the NPV and all these other mechanisms, but it's been kind of a downer. But I think this is just one of the issues with these sort of like intermittent solutions, like the national popular vote, is that it doesn't really necessarily take into account some of the gross inequities by state.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, just to briefly just touch on the environmental piece one last time, I just want to, tell everybody that like there is definitely hope. I know we're being a little diabolical right now, trying to talk about like how, well, we're far away from things being better, but there is so many different companies here in America and around the world that are doing research into, like reducing global admissions, not just in America, but all over the world, different types of technologies being used. I recently just looked at a study that said that there are now seaweed farms popping up all over the world where people are taking
Mm.
seaweed and using that to create biofuels that are 100% just green. And they're trying to do research on that right now to have some of that replace fossil fuels as well. So, because I know that sometimes people are unsure about the consistency of solar and wind power
Yeah.
technologies. So this is not another form of renewable energy that we can tap into because seaweed is everywhere all over the world. So that is another area of progress that's being made. So, I think the green revolution will continue to move forward, as long as people continue to advocate on its behalf.
I agree. I mean, I wouldn't be doing this show if I didn't in some way believe that we had the capacity to bring about radical change. It's just, as we've been talking about things as they have been historically, and also what they're looking like now, it is easy to get a little disillusioned about, what the future can look like. But, Desmond, not only does he have a series of acres with horses on them, he is also a provider of knowledge, a diplomat of knowledge, if you will.
Yes, I tried to. Living out in the state of Montana, I
Shout out to Montana.
I try to bring a different perspective. I was born and raised right outside of Philadelphia, and then moved over here to the state of Montana. So got a lot of different cultural perspectives to pull from to give my point to the world.
Well, while we are here, while I have you,
Yes.
um, what's it like in Montana?
You
What's it
know,
waiting
it's
on?
it's the motto of the state is that it's the last best place. And one of the things that people like to talk about who live here is that if anyone ever asks you about the state of Montana, you are obligated to tell them the most horrific thing possible because we don't want more people moving here.
Wow,
Um, so that's actually like rule number one.
it's impressive.
So mostly because like in the last like recent years, we have been having not a population boom per se, because we're still only like 1 million people who live here, but we are having quite an influx of people moving here from California. And with a lot of people moving here from the West Coast, they bring their higher wages because they were paid higher wages over there, which were not even really living wages there, but they're more than living wages here,
Mm-hmm.
which has raised the property value around here. And so people who are still being paid like dirt in this state no longer can even afford to live in the place they were born because so many people are moving here who have money and the rest of us still do not. So
Oh, so you all are also having issues with gentrification.
it is affecting white people too. You'd be surprised. But yeah, no, city that I live in, Missoula, Montana, as well as the other college town, Bozeman, Montana. Property values here and there have skyrocketed the last 10 years. I mean, they've more than doubled in certain places in the state. So it's it is becoming a more popular place to live. But as far as the culture itself, like I love it here. I mean, it's really laid back. As long as you're okay with the fact that you're not going to have a normal like city lifestyle. You're not going to be able to go to Nordstrom's and buy yourself clothes. You're not going to have a bunch of crazy things to do. There's no theme parks out here. You can't go to the beach, like all
Oh,
that kind of stuff. I mean,
ooh.
but it's real simple living, but if you can get beyond that, I mean, I think it's a great place to live personally. Especially as a person of color, you would think that it would be a really kind of like a racist place to be. But as someone who's lived here for 10 years, I've experienced less racism here than I ever did when I lived in the East Coast.
That's insane to me.
It's the truth.
I believe you. I'm just like, wow. Huh.
Yeah, I can't explain it to you. I'm not like an anthropologist. Can't break down the culture differences that in deep, from why a place like the Philadelphia metro area is so much more racially intolerant than the almost completely white state of Montana. And maybe that's just been my experience. I'm one person. Maybe I've been lucky since I've been out here, but I
Yeah.
can only speak to what I've experienced. So, and in my experience, I dealt with racism consistently living outside of Philly. And here, it's almost never been an issue. I mean, I'm not going to say it's never happened. I've had a couple run-ins here and there, but just like in comparison, it's dwarfed compared to what I've experienced back home.
But I don't know. I think Montana, I mean, it seems like it would be a very beautiful state. Like I'm sure there's some very scenic areas to it that I would probably fall in love with, but I understand that it is full of axe murderers, and thus I will not move to Montana.
We have like the lowest like crime rate, I think, in the country.
Aren't you not supposed to be telling people this? Wasn't
Okay,
that the whole
okay.
point?
You're right. You're right.
There are axe murders in Montana. Stay out. And shout
Yeah.
out to Montana once again to my listeners there.
Yeah. Just to close on the subject a little bit here, living in a place like this has changed my opinion of the gun debate. I'm not going to lie to you.
Ooh.
And the reason why was because when I lived in Pennsylvania, like I just thought about guns as being a bad thing. I just figured, well, people have guns, they just kill each other. That's the only thing they use for. But like, I personally don't know that many people who don't own guns. And like I said, there's
No
almost no
surprises
crime
there.
here. There's no crime here. And I don't know. Maybe people are afraid to break into somebody's house because they know that everyone owns a gun. And Montana's laws are set up to where, like, if someone breaks into your house, you're legally allowed to kill them,
Oh my God. See,
and
this is
you'll
we
get away, and you'll get away with it
all
because they
right.
broke into your house.
We're gonna have to
Um,
have a talk about that.
but like it's one of those things where even though that's the case, there's no crime out here. So you know, it's challenged my beliefs about are guns the problem or are people the problem. It's made that issue a lot more gray for me. I'll say that much.
So I know, okay, so this everybody who's listening, this is how Desmond and I get down. So when he and I talk, this is usually how it goes. So this is not anything that we have rehearsed. But all right, so let's get into this gun stuff. So I am actually someone who likes guns. I don't have any problem with them whatsoever. I and the only thing that I will say, no, I'm going to say a lot actually, not the only thing I will say, is that we really have to think about this in terms of like, the fact that folks feel entitled to their property as they should. But the majority of what the police, aside from slavery, from which it originates, is also really just the protection of personal property.
Yeah.
And I think that, when you think about the reasons why people steal, it is not because they just hate you and they want to break the windows that you just paid $5,000 for because you got the triple pane and not the double pane. Like that's not necessarily why they're doing it. And I think we have to really address those inequities before we can continue, or we should not, let me back the truck up. We need to explore those inequities to see how they influence people's reasons for breaking into folks' houses. Because like, yes, on one hand in Montana, it may be the fact that people are like, yo, I know everybody in this hoe has a shotgun. So I'm going to tread light. Or maybe, I don't know. I'm just starting to get familiar with the state of Montana, and I'm sure they will let me know. But, maybe there's also from what it sounds like most folks have access to employment. I don't know what the unemployment rate is in Montana, but I would venture to say that that may have something to do with it. And all I'm really saying is that I don't want to do too much about Montana necessarily. But what I want to say is that I think that, we also need to be careful about just thinking about the owning of personal property and like as that being paramount to our interactions with each other. I know that sounds super hippy dippy.
Okay. Hey, no, I understand where you're coming from. I, it's kind of hard I was trying to look for the unemployment rates here in Montana, it
Hmm.
feels everything's skewed right now because of coronavirus. So it doesn't really
Yeah,
feel
that's true. Ugh.
like any figure I could pull out will be fair, because it seems like unemployment is at 11% in Montana right
Jeez.
now, and
Wow.
there's the reports are saying that's primarily because of coronavirus. So yeah, I don't think any figures are going to be realistically fair at the moment for
Yeah.
anywhere in the country. Um, but yeah, no, I can understand what you're saying here. Yeah, our conversation that we have in this country about guns, I feel like, this is one of those instances, and I'm sure maybe you feel differently about this. That's actually what I appreciate about our conversations, is that we are not so consistent on how we believe of things across the board.
Yeah.
But the gun debate for me has always been, I feel like people try to pursue it on a national level. Whereas I don't know that maybe a national approach to gun reform is the best case, because I don't know that guns are as much of an issue in certain states as they are in other states. So maybe these really should be state laws.
Mm.
But that's just my take on it, because I mean, like, maybe the guns aren't an issue in Nebraska, but they're an issue in Illinois. So
Hmm.
maybe Illinois should have different gun laws than Nebraska, just because of maybe you need to approach your ways you combat this issue differently in two different areas. But that's just how I think about it, is that maybe, this is the time where states, choosing for themselves is more appropriate.
You and I, we're going to have to put a pin in this. We're going to have to put a pin, because we're going to, first of all, because I know what you're doing, you sneaky salmon. I know, I know the tangent we're about to go on, and I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it because I need to do some research, which means that we do have another opportunity to have one of our always engaging conversations. But we're going to put a pin in this, sir, because we can't, because we'll go down the road. We've already done it. We took a detour to talk about Halloween and the Shutter Channel. Like, no. Okay.
Well, oh, okay.
All right.
I'm just trying to provide some colorful commentary for the listeners.
The listeners have all the colorful commentary they need. Did you not hear my last episode in which I broke out into a full-on laughter about a specific type of ground cover native to the state of Maryland that I will not say because I've already said it enough? We're not doing it. No. Okay. Stop it. Everybody, thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Crossroads. Desmond, do you have any final thoughts that are not going to take us down a long, dark path? In fact, I'm going to give you specific instructions. Please tell the listeners where they can find you.
Yes.
Please, and all the things.
Once
And that's
again,
it.
my name is Desmond Price, and you can find me on the Independent Thought podcast. You can find me on most major platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, basically any platform that you might be interested in. I'm probably on there. You can link up with me on Instagram at Independent Thought, on Twitter as well. Feel free to DM me if you found me through this podcast. Let me know. And if you haven't already, please give the Crossroads podcast a 5-star review and a
Aww.
subscribe, because if you haven't done that already and you're listening right now, stop what you're doing and
Stop what
please
you're doing.
thank you. Just
My
thank you.
word. Thank you. That was nice. And do I have any shout outs to give to anybody? Actually, yes, I do. Shout out to at Glitz and Gems. I've had them as a sponsor on the show before. They were actually featured on the local World Star Hip Hop page recently for her amazing soaps and body butters and everything. And they're in their beautiful shapes, like gels, like gems. It's gorgeous. So Glitz and Gems. That's Corey at Diversity 101. And I think that's all. Yes. No. Yes. Is it? I
I have
think
a
so.
final thought. I have a final thought.
You have a final thought? Is this a tangent?
Nope.
Do you promise?
It sure is.
All right.
All right. So everyone out there, thank you for listening to this episode today. Thank you for taking the time to hear everything that we talked about. My final takeaway to everybody is kind of just branching off the episode that Rashida and I did on my podcast. Everyone's vote does matter. Please don't ever think for a second that your vote does not matter, and it is election season. Please exercise your right to vote. I mean, especially at the local level, there are
Yes.
definitely initiatives that are on your ballot for your county, for your state. I know uh, legal marijuana is on the ballot for the state of Montana this year, and including in that is expunging the records of people who are in jail for marijuana possession, which is a whole nother avenue I'm not going to go down right now. But the point is that there is very important issues on the ballot, even beyond Trump versus Biden. So please go out and vote.
Yes. Please vote. I'm not, I can't take it seriously in this moment, but I, somewhere inside is the seriousness to say, please take this seriously because it's a lot at stake. I erroneously have thought that maybe, that if Trump wins, that at least it'll keep those liberal whites, outside picketing. But I don't think we can really stand for that anymore. So we got to get it. We got to get him up out of here. So please vote. I feel very strongly that you may not be a Trump person if you listen to the show. You probably don't listen. So I'm not talking to y'all, but please go vote. And that concludes another episode, and we will see you at the crossroads.